Section 4, question 1. A sample of water was taken from each of 10 different locations in a pond. The pH of each sample was measured. The measurements are summarized in the frequency table shown below. Frequency table, it basically just tells you how many samples were in each range. I think they wrote this in somewhat numerical order to confuse you because you're looking at it and you're like, why does it say 1, 2, 4, 3? But it really could have said any numbers, 8, 12, 25, as long as it added up to 10, because that's how many samples they got. So the question is asking how many samples have a pH of 7.4 or greater, and that means you're looking in two rows, 7.4 to 7.6 and 7.7 to 7.9. So the total number is going to be 4 plus 3, which is 7, and so the answer is D. Question 2, in 2015, the city of Miami had a population of 441,000 people and an area of 36 square miles. What was the population density of Miami in people per square mile? Even if you have no idea what population density means, they're basically defining it for you. They're saying people per square mile, which means that we're going to divide. So we're going to take 441,000 people divided by 36 square miles, and when you do that on your calculator, you're going to get 12,250. Question 3, we have a box and whisker plot. It says the Metropolitan Museum of Art has plates on display from the Roman Empire and ancient Greece. The box plots shown summarize the distributions of the diameters in centimeters of all the museum's plates from each region. That's the two regions. How does the median diameter of the plates from the Roman Empire R compare to the median diameter of the plates from ancient Greece? This is very straightforward. It's number 3. When you see a whisker diagram or a box plot, you only have to know 5 things. Right over here on the left, that's the minimum value. If they measured all the diameters of the plates, the plate with the smallest diameter was 5. This is the maximum value here, meaning the largest diameter was somewhere between 25 and 30. Right in the middle of the box is the median, or the 50th percentile. The left side of the box is the first quartile, or the 25th percentile. The right side of the box is the 75th percentile. And that's really all you have to know for how to read one of these diagrams. So the question is asking, how does the median of the Roman Empire compare to the median of the Greek plates? So the median of the Roman Empire, we can write out the number. It's about 12, I'm going to guess, because it's right in the middle. And the median of the Greek plate, I'm going to guess, is about 18, because it's a little closer to 20. So how does Rome compare to Greece? Obviously, it's going to be choice A, because R is 12 and G is 18. Question 4, the combustion of glucose releases energy. The ratio of grams of glucose combusted to kilocalories of energy released is 12 to 45. How many grams of glucose must be combusted to provide 85.5 kilocalories of energy? So this is number 4, and it's pretty easy. The one thing that's nice about this is that the original ratio, 12 to 45, is in grams to kilocalories, and what they want is also grams to kilocalories, which basically means we don't have to do any unit conversions. So the question is asking how many grams must be combusted to provide 85.5 kilocalories. Grams is up here, kilocalories is down there. We put the 85 here, cross multiply, 12 times 85 divided by 45. You don't actually have to do this on your calculator, because what you'll notice is that 12 is about 1/4 of 45. So you're looking for something around 20. And obviously the closest answer is going to be C. If you did it on your calculator, that's fine. You're not really wasting much time. Question 5, the function f is defined by f of x equals x squared minus 7. What is the value of f of 3? This is very straightforward. Do you understand function notation, which basically means if we put x into the function, this is what we get. So now we're putting 3 into the function. We're basically just going to substitute 3 for x wherever we see it. So 3 squared minus 7 becomes 9 minus 7. So therefore f of 3 equals 2. And so the answer is C. This would also be equivalent to saying when the x value is 3, the y value, f of 3, is going to be 2, if you were representing this on a graph. Question 6, the probability of an unfair coin landing on heads side is 0.6. So obviously the coin is unfair because normally it should be 0.5, even on both sides. A student tossed this coin into the air 9 times. It landed on tail side up 5 times and head side up 4 times. What is the probability that the coin will land head side up on the 10th toss? They're really trying to trick you here, because if you're reading, you're thinking to yourself, oh, it landed tail side up 5 times and heads up 4 times, then we obviously need a few more heads times to make the 0.6 probability. But what you have to remember is that each time you toss the coin, it's an independent event. So it's not really connected to any of the other times, which means that on any given time you toss this coin, the probability of landing heads is still going to be 0.6. So that's why the answer is going to be C. Now, if you did toss the coin continuously, let's say you did 100 times, you probably will find that on average, 40 times it lands on tails, and 60 times it lands on heads, but that's no guarantee that any individual toss is going to be heads or tails to make up for the lack of heads or tails on previous tosses, if that makes sense. Question 7, it says the 2 histograms show the distribution of data set A and data set B respectively. Data set B is the result of removing the outlier from data set A. Which of the following statements about the means of the data set A and B is true? So let's look at what's going on. They said B is a result of removing the outlier. Now, I think on this copy of the SAT, these should have been gray, but what you should still be able to see is that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars here, 1, 2, 3, 4 bars here. What's the difference? They removed this bar. That's the outlier. The outlier means that it's the data point that is sort of on the extreme. So by removing this one, they're asking what happens to the mean or the average. Well, obviously, if you're removing the highest value or the highest set of values, your average is going to go down. So reading through this, the means of data set A and B are the same. Nope. The means of data set A is greater than set B. Yes, that's exactly what we said because B went down. C, the mean of data set A is less than the mean of data set B. Nope, that's the opposite. No comparison about the means can be made. Not true. We do have enough information. So the answer is going to be B. Questions 8 and 9 refer to this. It says, Jaime drove a car from West Union, Minnesota through North Dakota to Miles City, Montana. The total distance he traveled through each state is shown in the picture. So I think this diagram is really confusing. I guess you should think of it as this point right here is West Union in Minnesota. This point right here is Miles City in Montana. And basically we're looking at 3 intervals when he was driving through Minnesota, then North Dakota, and then Minnesota. It's actually a girl. And then it says the distance D in miles Jaime drove as a function of time t in hours since she started driving is modeled by the equation d equals 60t. And that you should recognize as distance equals rate times time. So question 8, it says, according to the model, what distance in miles had Jaime driven 3 hours after she started? Looks like she's not changing her speed, also because this is question 8. So this question is actually really easy. We basically just use the formula that they gave us. And if they're saying, what distance did she drive after 3 hours of driving a constant 60 miles? We're basically plugging in 3 for time, and 60 times 3, her distance is 180 miles. So D is the answer. Question 9, it says, what interval represents all values of t during which Jaime drove in North Dakota? North Dakota is in the middle here. Now, think about what the diagram is telling us. We know the distance that Jaime spent in each of these states. We also know that she drove a constant 60 miles. So we have the distance, we have the speed. It's very easy to get the time because we can just plug the distance values into t. So we're looking for this time when she crossed the state line and this time over here. In order to figure out how much time it took her from the beginning to 120 miles, we just use the formula. Distance equals 60 times t, and we plug in 120 for the distance equals 60 times t, divide both sides by 60, t equals 2. So we know that at 2 hours, or the 2-hour mark, she crossed the state line. Let's do the same thing over here, and we're going to use the same formula. Distance equals 60t. The total distance is 120 plus 360, which is 480. So it took her 480 miles to reach Minnesota, driving at a rate of 60. Divide both sides, we get t equals 8. So basically she crossed into Minnesota between 2 and 8 hours. And that means the answer is choice B. Question 10, the graph shows the number of algae cells grown during an experiment on the y-axis in millions of cells per milliliter of water, d days after the start of an experiment, and that's on the x-axis. Between which 2 days was the growth rate in millions of cells per milliliter of water per day of the algae the greatest? Keep in mind, this is one thing, millions of cells per ml per water, because that's on the y-axis, per day, which is on the x-axis. So they're kind of defining for us what the growth rate is, and visually what it's going to be is the slope, because if I picked any 2 points, let's say from there to there, the number of cells here is vertical and the number of days is on the horizontal. So that's actually the rate. The rate is really the slope. So if they want the greatest rate, what we're looking for is the interval with the greatest slope or the interval with the steepest incline. So visually, it becomes obvious that from days 5 to 6, that's the steepest, and that's going to be the answer because that means the rate was the greatest. One thing to keep in mind is that it's not the fact that the line length is the longest from days 5 to 6 that makes it the greatest rate. It's the fact that the line is the steepest. For example, we could have had a graph that looked like this. And even though this line is longer than this line, this interval right here is still going to be a greater rate than this interval right here. And visually that makes sense because if you follow over time what happens, from days 5 to 6, it's going to shoot up the most compared to, say, days 6 to 7 or 7 to 8, in which case it rises only a little bit. Question 11, a local restaurant gives teachers a 20% discount on all their meals. If a teacher pays $14 for a meal after the discount was applied, what was the price of the meal before the discount? So on the old SAT, they used to hint at this skill, and on the new SAT, they really want you to know this, like the back of your hand. When we're doing discounts or percent increases, let's imagine you want to give a 20% increase on an original price. So let's say your original price is, $80. You know that to do a 20% increase, you would first multiply by 0.2, find out what that is, and then add it back onto the 80. The way the SAT wants you to know how to do this is take the original price, instead of multiplying by 0.2 and adding it back on, multiply by 1.20, because what that does is you're accounting for the original 80 and then you're adding back on the 20, because you can break this up by saying that's the same as 80 times 1 plus 0.2, which is 80 plus what we did up here, 80 times 0.2. So very quickly, increasing by 20%, you multiply by 1.2. If you want to increase by 35%, you want to multiply by 1.35. Increase by 5%, you want to multiply by 1.05. Increase by, this is a little harder, 0.2%, we're going to multiply by 1.002. And this you should be able to do very quickly. On the other hand, if we're doing a decrease, like a discount in this case, we want to go down by 20%. Well, think about it. What are we going to be left with after we take away 20%? We're going to be left with 80%. So you want to multiply by 80. That's the shortcut. The long way of doing that would have been 80 times 0.2 and then subtracting it from 80, but we're going to do it the quick way. A decrease in 35%, we're going to multiply 80. What are you left with when you take away 35%? 65%. So we multiply by 0.65. Let's say we decreased by 5%. We're going to do 80 times 0.95 because we're left with 95%. Let's say we decrease by 0.2%. What are we left with? This one's a little bit tricky. We're going to be left with 99.8%. So we're going to multiply by 0.998. Now, what makes this problem a little bit more confusing is that they're giving you the price after the discount. So don't figure out 20% of 14 and then add it back on, because the 20% was taken off of the original price. So you kind of have to use algebra. Let's say the original price was P. We're doing a 20% discount. That means we're going to multiply by 0.80. And we know that the new price was 14. So do that on your calculator. You're going to get that P is 1750. So this is all the math you really needed to do. But this is the background that you needed to know in order to be able to solve this quickly. Question 12, it says amount of water in 80 bottles. So let's read it. The frequency table above shows the distribution of the actual number of fluid ounces of water in a random sample of 80 20-ounce bottles of the water at a bottling plant. Bottles are only sold if they contain at least 19.8 but no more than 20.2 fluid ounces of water. If the proportion of bottles that can be sold is the same for the sample and for the 16,000 20-ounce bottles produced at the plant each day, how many of the 16,000 bottles cannot be sold? So that's a lot of words. All right, what's the important information? Bottles are sold only if they contain between 19.8 and 20.2. So we're looking at this interval right here. These are the bottles that are sold, which means the bottles that cannot be sold, because that's what they're interested in, is up here. So that's a total of 1 and 1, which is 2. This is a sample of 80, and they're basically saying the same proportion that cannot be sold in this sample is the same that cannot be sold in the 16,000. So really we just have to make a simple ratio. 2 bottles out of 80 cannot be sold. From here, how many bottles out of 16,000 cannot be sold? When you do that on your calculator, X turns out to be 400. A lot of words, but at the end of the day, it was really just a simple proportion. Question 13, for the linear function f, that means this is a line, the table shows several values of x and their corresponding values of f of x. That means we're looking at points on the line. What is the y-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x in the xy plane? So what's important to remember here is that we are looking at a line, and each of these pairs represents a coordinate. So that would be -4, 14, -2, 8. Given that they want to know the y-intercept, we're looking for a specific pair when x is 0 and y is some number. So we want to know this pair. So how are we going to do that? Well, the way that all these points are related is that when you calculate the slope for any given 2 points, they're all going to be the same because they're all located on one line. So the strategy is going to be, let's calculate the slope of this line using any 2 points, and then using the slope of the line, we're going to calculate what the y value is when we have this specific pair. So I'm going to take the first 2 because it looks easy to me. Slope we know is y2 minus y1, change in y over change in x, x2 minus x1. So let's do it. So we've got 14 minus 8 divided by -4 minus -2. So that becomes 6 over 4 minus -2 is plus +2. -2, and that becomes -3. Knowing that the slope is -3, I'm going to take 2 points and I'm going to do this point and then compare it with this point. So we're really looking at -2, 8 compared to 0, y. So same thing, y2 minus y1, we're going to do 8 minus y divided by -2 minus 0. We'll multiply both sides by -2, we get positive 6 equals 8 minus y. Add y to both sides, subtract 6 from both sides, we get y equals 2. And the answer is therefore the ordered pair, choice C, because we know this coordinate is going to be 0, 2. So that's the y-intercept. Question 14, when a buffet restaurant charges $12 per meal, the number of meals it sells per day is 400. For each 50-cent increase in the price per meal, the number of meals sold per day decreases by 10. I guess that makes sense because you don't want to pay more. What is the price per meal that results in the greatest sales in dollars for meals each day? So when I was looking at this first, I was trying to think visually what this looks like. It's clearly a linear function because it says as the price increases, the number of meals sold decreases. So initially I was thinking it's going to be some kind of linear function with the price down here and then the number of meals sold on the y-axis. And basically the number of sales at any given point, let's say right here, this is the number sold and this is the price. The total sales is going to be multiplying the price by the numbers. So visually what you're looking at is you want to find the point on this graph where the area of the rectangle is going to be the greatest. And that's actually not very easy to do. And so what I realized is that the easier way to do this problem is basically just test out the answers. So let's consider choice A when you're selling it for $16, and we're going to calculate the number of meals sold when the price is $16. Well, we know our reference point is at $12 we sell 400, and each time we increase by 50 cents, the number of meals goes down by 10. So going from $12 to $16, this is the math, you can probably do it in your head, we've actually increased the price by $4. So $4 divided by 50 cents is actually 8 increases. And we know for each 50-cent increase, the number of meals decreases by 10. So we take 8 times 10. And this is the number of meals that we lost. So the final calculation that we do is 400 minus 80 equals 320. 320 is going to be the number of meals sold when the price is $16. So what's the total sale? Again, like we said before, take $16, multiply by the total meals sold, and for choice A, the total meal is going to be 5120. Basically, we're going to do that same calculation for each answer choice. So in choice B, increasing $12 to $20, that's $8. That means there are 16 50-cent increases. Multiply that by 10. That's 160 decreases in meals. So 400 minus 160 is going to be 240. When we multiply that out, it's going to be 4,800. So we notice that A is still a better answer than B. When we increase the price to $24 from 12, 24 minus 12 is 12, divided by 0.5, that's 24 increases of 50 cents. And that results in, multiply that by 10, 240 decreases. So 400 minus 240 is going to equal 3840. And we can tell what's actually happening. It looks like the number of meals sold is going down, but we do need to make sure that when we hit $28, the higher price doesn't actually result in a greater number of sales. So $12 to $28, that's going to be $16, which means that's 32 increases, multiplied by 10 is 320. 400 minus 320, we've actually only sold 80 meals times $28, and that total is going to be $22.40. We get the most in total sales when we sell the meals at $16. So A is going to be the answer. Question 15, the scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables, x and y. A line of best fit is also shown. What is an equation of the line of best fit? So this is super easy because we don't even have to pay attention to the exact data points. They just want the equation of the line. And notice how the answers are set up. We're really only choosing between two values in terms of positive or negative. The easiest way to do this is, first, let's look at the y-intercept. We know that the y-intercept is somewhere near 4. And notice they put the y-intercepts over here, keeping in mind y equals mx plus b form, in which b is the y-intercept. A value that's a little less than 4, 3.7 works, not 1.3, not 1.3. Now, what is the slope? Notice what we're left with. We're left with positive 1.3x and negative. We know that the line tilts this way, so that's a positive slope. If it tilted that way, that would be a negative slope. So just by visualizing it, we can cross off choice C, and that means the answer is A. Now, if they wanted us to calculate the slope or an approximate slope, what I would do is take 2 points that fall on integers, such as here and about here, and then you calculate rise over run. So the rise would be 14 minus 6, which is 8, divided by 8 minus 2, which is 6. So 8 divided by 6 is probably going to be around 1.3. Question 16, for the linear function, so we're looking at a line, f of 2 equals 10, and the graph of y equals f of x has a slope of 3. Which of the following equations defines f? So let's keep in mind what we're looking at. They're telling us we're looking at a line. They're giving us 1 point on the line, 2, 10, and they're saying it has a slope of 3. So if you give me a point on a graph, and you're saying this has a definite slope, that means I can draw a line in only one direction. That's enough information to define a line. So let's look at the answers and see which one it is. What's the easiest way to do this? We know that it has a slope of 3. Notice these are all in y equals mx plus b form. So the slope is m, cross off slope 2, slope 2. Now we're choosing between c and d. What's the easiest way? We know 1 point that's on the line. So let's just plug in the x and the y value and see if they match up. So choice C, this is going to be f of 2. So that's going to be 3 times 2 plus 10 is going to be 16. So doesn't match because we're looking for a 10. Choice D, 3 times 2 plus 4. That does equal 10. So this proves that f of 2 equals 10. And so choice D is going to be our answer. Question 17, if 7x plus 21 equals negative 2, what is the value of x plus 3? Now you could do this the way that they teach you in school, which is subtract 21 from both sides, divide by 7, and then solve for x, and then add 3. That's going to give us some fractions, which are kind of annoying because I don't like fractions. On the SAT, in a problem like this, they're actually rewarding you for seeing something. X plus 3 and 7x plus 21 are related because if you multiply x plus 3 by 7, you're going to get 7x plus 21. So what's the easiest way to solve this? Divide both sides by 7. So you divide the left side by 7 and the right side by 7. Look what you're going to get. 7x divided by 7 is x. 21 divided by 7 is 3. That's exactly what we're looking for. And the answer is just going to be negative 2 over 7, which is choice D. Basically what they're trying to do is they're rewarding the kids who are able to see this because it actually saves them a lot of time and it's less risky because you don't have to deal with fractions. Question 18, we've got a system of equations. It says the solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of 3x plus y? So very similar to the previous problem. Normally with systems of equations, you want to do elimination. So you can multiply, say, the top equation by 2, eliminate the x's, solve for y, then solve for x, plug back in to get what they're asking for, which is 3x plus y. But if they're asking for something specific like 3x plus y, it'll benefit you if you take a couple extra seconds to look at what they're giving and ask yourself, can I get 3x plus y by using some kind of a shortcut? And what you'll notice is, hey, if I add the two equations together, x plus 2x is 3x, 2y plus negative y is y. That's exactly what they want. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these two equations together. X plus 2x is 3x, 2y minus y is y, 10 plus 5 is 15. And then basically I got the answer in a fraction of the amount of time that it would have taken. Question 19, it says an advertising agency guarantees that its services will increase website traffic by 3.5% compared to each previous week. What type of function best models the weekly guaranteed website traffic as the number of weeks increase? If you glance at the answers, obviously we are increasing, so you can cross off B and D because we're not going to lose traffic. The real question that this problem is asking is it exponential or is it linear? The difference between an exponential and a linear function is in a linear function, as time goes forward, you're increasing at each interval by the same amount. An exponential function means that as time goes forward, each period of time results in a bigger increase, as you can see by the increasing steepness of these triangles that I'm drawing. So when interpreting this, since it says it's increasing by 3.5 compared to each previous week, that tells you that the increase each week is not going to be the same. Because let's say it starts off with like 10 people watching, and then it increases by 3.5. So I don't know, let's estimate that that's 11. If it increases by another 3.5%, the increase is going to be bigger than the previous week because your new total is now bigger. So that tells you that the increase is not going to be constant, it's actually going to be exponential. And by the way, this is how compound interest works. This is why people invest in the stock market, because of compound interest. In other words, you keep getting returns that are based not on the original amount of money that you put in, but it keeps increasing based on the new amount of money that you have as time goes on. Question 20, this is a scatter plot. It says a scatter plot shows a data set of 11 points and a line of best fit for the data. For how many data points is the y value predicted by the line greater than the actual y value? So keep in mind the actual values are represented by each dot, and the line is an approximation because it shows like a pattern. They're asking for how many actual points is the y value of the line greater than the dot. So the y value is the vertical. So really what that means is for how many dots is the y value higher than the actual dot. So basically you just have to count the number of dots below the line. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The answer is A, and that's that. All right, 21, Dana on a bicycle. Dana is riding a 100-mile long bicycle race. The function f is defined by f of x equals 100 minus 18x. It models the number of miles that Dana has remaining x hours after she starts. What is the best interpretation of f of 2 equals 64? So for this problem, you just really want to go by the way that they define it. If x is the number of hours after she starts the race, that means she's been riding for about 2 hours, and 64 is the number of miles she has remaining. So basically 2 hours have passed and she's got 64 miles left. That's the basic idea. If you were to try to analyze the function, it does make sense because the total distance is 100, and after each hour that passes, it looks like she's riding at a rate of 18 miles per hour. So that whole distance will get subtracted from the total distance of 100. But you actually don't need to know that for this problem. Really, we're looking at 100 miles distance minus a rate times a time, which is another distance. And that's how they're getting the function. So let's look at the answers. It says choice A, Dana rides about 64 miles in the first 2 hours of the race. So again, they're defining 64 as what's left, not as what she has already ridden. So cross that out. Choice B, Dana will ride the last 64 miles in 2 hours. So the 2 hours is not how much time is left, it's how much time she's already ridden. So it's not will ride. Choice C, when Dana has ridden 64 miles, she has about 2 hours remaining. So this choice gets both of them wrong. This is saying she's ridden 64 miles as opposed to 64 miles left. And it's also saying she has 2 hours remaining when the function is saying she's ridden 2 hours. So C is completely wrong. Choice D, 2 hours after Dana starts the race, she has 64 miles remaining. So that's exactly what the function is saying. So choice D is the answer. Really, to do this problem, you just needed to read the problem and sort of interpret these words and see that it's the same thing as these words. Question 22, we got these two triangles. It says triangle ABC and triangle DEF each have an angle measuring 29 and an angle measuring 54 degrees, as shown above. Which of the following statements is sufficient to prove triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF? All right, so the first thing we want to notice about these triangles is they have two corresponding angles that are equal to each other. That automatically means that these triangles are similar. To prove triangles similar, really, the theorem you need is angle-angle, because if two angles are similar, then obviously the third angle is going to be equal to each other. But notice how the SAT tries to trick you. They drew them in exactly the same size, or just about. It's not necessarily true that these are congruent, because I can draw a similar triangle with the same angles, if you believe me, 29 over here and 54 over here. These three triangles are similar, but obviously they're not necessarily congruent. So how are we going to make this triangle congruent? Let's go through the choices. Choice A, it says the length of EF is 10. So if they're just saying the length of EF is 10, that doesn't mean these are congruent, because this triangle could still be bigger or smaller than the right triangle. So A is going to be out. B, the measure of angle EDF is 97. Well, as we said before, since they have two angles in common, the third angle is definitely going to be congruent. So whether it's 97, I didn't even do the math, no matter what, angle D and angle A are going to be similar, or they're going to be the same. So whether EDF is 97 doesn't actually make them congruent. Choice C, the length of BC is equal to the length of EF. So that would mean this side is equal to this side. And so you can actually think about this intuitively. Imagine that we have two congruent sticks, EF and BC, and then we have longer sticks, ED, and let's say it goes this way, and FD, let's say it extends this way. Given that this side is fixed, this angle is fixed, that angle is fixed, there's no real way to move these sticks around. You can't rotate them because the angle is fixed. And so what's going to happen is, if you do it on both sides, you're going to end up with the exact same triangle, because you're starting with the same side and two fixed angles. So said more formally, the ways that you prove two triangles congruent, if you remember from school, is going to be side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, not angle, side, side, as my teacher used to call it, the donkey theorem. So choice C is going to be correct because it's angle, side, angle. Choice D, the measure of angle BAC is equal to the measure of angle EDF. So that's what we said before. This actually has to be true, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily the same size. So choice D is out and C is the answer. Question 23, how many solutions does the equation x plus 7 absolute value equals -4 have? I think they're trying to trick you here, because if you think about what you're looking at, you should realize when you take the absolute value of any quantity, that means it's the positive value, or it's the magnitude, or it's the distance from that value to 0 on the number line. You can think of it in any of those ways, but it's impossible that the absolute value of something is -4 or a negative number, so the answer is automatically 0. Now, let's say the equation actually said the absolute value of x plus 7 equals 4. This is solvable, and the way that you would solve that real quickly, I like to break it up into two equations. X plus 7 either equals 4, or x plus 7 either equals -4. So for the left equation, let's subtract 7 from both sides. That becomes x equals -3. For the right equation, we subtract 7 from both sides also. This becomes x equals -11. And when you plug both of these values back in, they work for this equation, but they're not going to work for this equation. Question 24, we have a quadratic. It says the solutions to the quadratic equation are a and b. What is the value of a plus b? So notice in this case, we actually cannot plug in the answers because there would be too many combinations for numbers that would add up to each of these. So we actually have to solve it. And this one is actually easily factorable. It becomes 3x minus 2 times x plus 1 equals 0, and then we're going to split it up. Either 3x minus 2 is equal to 0, or x plus 1 is equal to 0. In this case, subtract 1 from both sides. X is negative 1, or 3x, add 2 to both sides, equals 2. Divide both sides by 3, x equals 2/3. And so obviously one of these is a, one of these is b, doesn't matter which one. Negative 1 plus positive 2/3 is going to be negative 1/3, and the answer is going to be b. You could have also used a quadratic formula if you weren't able to factor it, but this one's pretty easy, so you should not have had too many problems with it. Question 25, it says, in the figure shown, point O is the center of the circle. Looks obvious enough. One vertex of the square lies on the circle, that's that one, and the opposite vertex is point O. If the area of the shaded region is 36 pi minus 18, what is the perimeter of the square? So first thing to know is that if I had a better copy of this test, the shaded region is everything inside the circle except for the square. So the square was completely white. Now, if you're trying to find the area of just that region, think about it logically. It makes sense that you would take the area of the entire circle minus the area of the square. And that's actually very convenient because look at how they express the area. You're taking something with pi minus 18. And you guys should all know that the area of a circle is pi r squared. So it's very convenient that 36 is a perfect square. Because if 36 is the area of the circle, or 36 pi rather, that actually means that the radius is going to be 6. Because 36 pi is the same as pi times 6 squared. So what that tells us is that the radius of the circle is 6. And if the area of the shaded region is 36 pi minus 18, then the area of the square is 18. So this is the only piece of information that we need right now. We know the area of the square. They want the perimeter of the square. So we all know how to get area of the square. It's area equals side squared. So working in reverse, you know intuitively that one of the sides has to be the square root of 18. Mathematically, it looks like this. The area of the square is 18, square root both sides. You get the square root of 18. So if one side is the square root of 18, the perimeter is going to be 4 times the square root of 18. And you're kind of on the right track because you're seeing radicals. And hey, look, nothing's in terms of 18, but 18 we can break up into 9 times 2. Square root 9, it becomes 4 times 3 times the square root of 2. 4 times 3 is 12 times square root of 2. And so the answer is C. Question 26, which of the following is equivalent to x to the 4th minus 8x squared plus 16? And then they give you these two. Now, if you're totally confused when you look at this, one way to do this is to take the answers, multiply them out. So if you actually multiply x plus 2 times x plus 2, and then x minus 2 times x minus 2, and then multiply those two together, you're actually going to get the original. And the same thing with the second example. So the answer is actually going to be choice C. It's both 1 and 2 if you do it that way. But that actually takes a lot of time. And what the SAT really wants you to see on this question is that this is a quadratic. It's just raised to the 4th power. So you're used to seeing something like x squared minus 8x plus 16. And you know how to factor that into x plus something, or in this case, x minus something, x minus 4. We can actually do the same thing here, but instead of using x and x, this becomes x squared minus 4 times x squared minus 4. So what that tells us is that this is exactly the same as number 2, x squared minus 4 squared. And then when you're looking at this, what you should notice is that, hey, this is the difference of two squares. So I know how to factor this. X squared minus 4 is the same as x plus 2 times x minus 2. Over here, it's the same thing, x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now, does that help us? Yeah, because if you look at the first equation, notice that it's actually the same thing. So we're going to group these two together and these two together. So this becomes x plus 2 squared times x minus 2 squared. And that's exactly how they get number 1. Doing this from here to here is actually the real way to do this problem. In other words, they are rewarding students who can see this as a quadratic and factor. The final way to do this would be to pick numbers and test it out, but there'd be no way to know if you've picked enough numbers to really actually prove that these are equivalent. I'd say if you were to pick 3 numbers and you saw that they were all the same, you could probably reasonably safely guess that they're all the same, but you'd never be 100% sure. By the way, for this problem, what you should have in your head memorized is obviously a plus b times a minus b is going to give you a squared minus b squared. You should also know in your head a plus b squared is going to give you a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, and then a minus b squared is going to give you a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Question 27, each year the value of an investment increases by 2.5% of the previous year's value. The initial value of the investment was $500, which equation gives the value of the investment y in dollars x years after the initial investment was made. So this talks about exponential growth, which we've already talked about in this video and the previous one. The basic form is y equals ab to the x. A is the initial value that you start with, b is what you're doing to that value, multiplying it by something, and x is always going to be the time frame. So going by that, we know the initial investment was 500. All the answers have 500. We're increasing by 2.5%. And if you watch the other part of the video, you know that the shortcut to get an increase of 2.5% means you have to multiply the original by 1 point, and be careful here, it's going to be 0.25. This is actually the same as multiplying the original by itself plus multiplying the original by 0.025, which is 0.25%. So looking at that, the only answer that makes sense is choice B, and that's what it is. And notice x is all the same, so that has to be right. Question 28, we have a system of equations. It says, how many solutions does the given system of equations have? So, and notice the choices, 0, 1, 2, or infinitely many. Now you can do this a number of ways. If you were to do it algebraically, remember from the video of the previous section of this test, we said that for an equation to have 0 solutions, you would want to end up with a contradiction. So when we combine these, we would have to get something like 5 equals 2, which is never the case. If we want infinitely many solutions, we would need an identity or a tautology, which is something like 5 equals 5 when all the variables drop out. One solution is easy. That would be x equals something like 1, y equals something like 3. Exactly 2 solutions would probably involve a quadratic equation. So you'd have 2 sets, x equals this, y equals that, or when x equals this, y equals that. Another way to conceive of this problem is to think about it visually, because what you'll notice is that you actually have 2 lines. Because x and y are both raised to the first power, these are equations of 2 lines. So graphically, for there to be 0 solutions between 2 lines, they would have to be parallel, meaning to say that they never intersect. With one solution, all they need is to have different slopes, because if you have 2 lines with different slopes, even if they're very similar, eventually the lines are going to cross. 2 solutions with 2 lines is going to be impossible, because with lines, they're either going to cross once or never. To get 2 solutions, On the SAT, most likely you would have to have a parabola intersected by a line that would have two solutions. Infinitely many solutions would mean your two lines are overlapped on each other, or another way of saying that is you're looking at the same equation. The easiest way to do this here is notice that 5 is related to 60 when you multiply by 12, and that's kind of convenient because y is related to 12 by multiplying by 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the first equation by specifically negative 12. And what do I get? We get negative 60x plus positive 12y equals negative 108. That's exactly the same equation as the bottom. So these two are really the same equation, which tells us that we're looking at a single line, and the answer is going to be that there are infinitely many solutions because these two equations are actually equivalent. Question 29. Bridges have spaces between their sections to allow for expansion and contraction caused by temperature variation. This space is known as the gap width. The size of the gap width, W of T in inches, is a linear function of the temperature T in degrees Fahrenheit. For a certain bridge, the gap width is 2.875 at 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 1.875 at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Which of the following defines the relationship? So they're telling us that this is a linear function. The gap width you could think of as the y value. The temperature you can think of as the t value. So if you're imagining a line, whether it goes up or down with a positive or negative slope, when they say the gap width is 2.875 at 40 degrees, that's like saying this is 1 point on the line, maybe here, and then it's also 1.875 at 100 degrees. That's another point on the line. And you guys know that if you have 2 points, that's enough information to define the line. And they're asking us which of the following defines the relationship. That's another way of asking which of the following is the equation of a line, because you notice that all of these are linear equations. So the way that I did this was I took my 2 points, I wrote them out, 40, comma, 2.875. That's obviously temperature, comma, gap width. And the other point is 100, comma, 1.875. And then what I did was, knowing the slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, I calculated the slope. And what you're going to get is 2.875 minus 1.875 equals 1 over 40 minus 60 is negative 60. So you know from the points that they gave, the slope is negative 1 over 60. That eliminates choices C and D. Now we have two choices left. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in each point and see if they work, and then eliminate the choice that doesn't work. So for choice A, we have negative 1 over 60, and we're going to plug in, I'm going to use my first point, 40 minus 40 plus 2.875, and that should give us the W of T value, or the Y value, 2.875. And obviously 40 minus 40 is 0, so this term drops out, plus 2.875, that's going to work. Now let's plug in the second point, use the same equation, 1 over 60, we're plugging in 100, 100 minus 40, plus 2.875, and the Y value in the second ordered pair is 1.875, so we can probably do this in our heads. 100 minus 40 is 60, times negative 1 over 60, that's going to be negative 1 plus 2.875, which is the same as 1.875. So choice A works for both these values, so it's going to be the answer. If you weren't sure, just very quickly plug in the first value for choice B, and you'll see that it won't work. So choice B is negative 1 over 60. T, we're using this first pair, times 40 plus 40 minus 2.875 equals 2.875. Now clearly if we do 80 times 1 over 60, we're going to get some messy fraction. So this is not going to be equal. And so choice B is not going to work. Question 30, the number of books in a library increased by 30% from 2002 to 2014. There were X books in the library in 2002. Which expression represents the number of books in the library in 2014 in terms of X? So this is a super easy problem if you've memorized the principle that I talked about before. You start with X books in 2002. What do you do if you want to increase X by 30% and you want to represent the new value? You simply multiply X by 1.3, because multiplying by X by 1.3 is the same as multiplying X by 1 and multiplying X by 0.3, which is 30%. So it's like saying you're multiplying 100% of X plus 30% of X, which gives you the new value, 130. And that's why the answer is going to be C. So just quickly remember, if you want to increase by 30% and you want the new value, you're going to multiply the original by 1.3. Let's say it's a 25% increase, you multiply by 1.25. If it's a 5% increase, multiply 1.05. If it's a 50% increase, multiply by 1.5. If it's a 25% decrease, you're multiplying by 0.75 because you're left with 75%. 5% decrease, multiply by 0.95. 50% decrease, multiply by 0.5. Question 31, in a survey of 240 television viewers, 3/5 indicated that they like comedies. Some indicated that they do not like comedies. The rest did not respond. If one of the 240 viewers is selected at random, the probability is 1/15 that the viewer did not respond. How many of the 240 viewers indicated that they do not like comedies? All right, so we got 3 groups, and it pays to just organize yourself. So the first group is the one who liked comedy, and that was 3/5 of the 240. The ones who did not like comedy, they're asking us about, they didn't give us a number, but the ones who did not respond were 1/15 of the group. So notice we have enough information to figure out the group who did not like comedies, because we know the total is 240 and we know each fraction. So you can do this a number of ways. You can calculate 3/5 of 240, you can calculate 1/15 of 240, subtract, and then get the number. So if we're going to do this in our heads, I would convert 3/5 to 15ths, which is going to be 9/15. So the people who like comedy plus the people who no response were 10/15. And that means that the people who did not like comedy are going to be 5/15, or exactly 1/3. So what we have to calculate is 1/3 of 240, which you can also do in your head. 240 divided by 3 is going to be 80. So that means exactly 80 people did not like comedy. So again, a number of different ways you can get to the solution, but just keep in mind to keep your 3 categories separate, and the total is 240. Question 32, what is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept of the graph of y equals blah, blah, blah? The y-intercept is when a graph crosses the y-axis. That's when x is equal to 0. So to solve this, we just make x 0 and see what y is. So that becomes y equals 3 to the 0 plus 9. Anything to the 0 is 1 plus 9. That means y is going to be 10. So the ordered pair of the y-intercept is 0, 10. And so the y-intercept is 10, and the y-coordinate of the y-intercept is 10. That's all you had to do for that problem. Question 33, we got 2 triangles. It says triangle ABC is similar to DEF, where A corresponds to D. That makes sense based on the diagram. What is the value of the cosine of F? So this is actually a really easy problem if you realize that similar triangles have the exact same trig function values. In other words, the sine of angle A in this triangle is going to be the same as the sine of angle D in this triangle because they're similar. So very quickly to demonstrate that, let's make up values for this triangle. We have to keep it similar. So this triangle is obviously a 3, 4, 5 triangle. If we divide by 6, for all sides. We get 3 divided 24 by 6 is 4 and 5. So let's take the sine of angle A. Sine of A is opposite over hypotenuse, which is 24 over 30. That's going to be the same as the sine of angle D, which is 4 over 5. And you know that's true because you can divide or reduce your first fraction. Divide by 6 top and bottom, we get 4 over 5. So what's important to keep in mind is that trig functions are ratios. So even though each individual side is not the same, in other words, 24 is not the same as 4, the sine of an angle is the same because it's the ratio between two sides. In other words, the ratio of 24 divided by 30 is the same as 4 divided by 5. That's why the sine of A is equal to the sine of D. So if you knew that, this becomes a very easy problem because the cosine of F is going to be the same as the cosine of C. So what's the cosine of C? It's going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, and that's exactly what we calculated, 24 over 30, and that reduces to 4 over 5. And so that's going to be the answer, 4 over 5, simply because you can't enter 24 over 30 in the free response section. Question 34, we have this graph, geothermal power capacity for 9 countries in 2010 in megawatts. It says the graph shows the power capacity for the 9 countries that had the greatest geothermal power capacity in 2010. What was the capacity in megawatts of the country that had the median capacity of the 9 countries? So this is actually a really easy problem. They're already talking in megawatts. They just want the median. So all we have to do is list out the values in order from least to greatest and find the middle one. We have a list of 9, so the median value is the middle. The middle number in a list of 9 is the 5th value. So we just have to list out the numbers all the way up to the 5th value and then stop. The smallest value is El Salvador, which is 204. Going up, it's going to be Japan, which is 536. Then 575, Iceland. After that, it's going to be 628, which is New Zealand. And then the next highest value is 863, which is Italy. And that's the 5th value in this list. So 863 is going to be the median capacity out of the 9 countries. You didn't even have to go to number 9. Question 35, we got a graph with a line. It says line L is shown in the xy plane. Point with coordinates 2C is on line L. What is the value of C? So obviously if we're looking at 2C, it's somewhere in the middle here. Doesn't fall nicely on one of the grid lines, so we're going to have to actually do some math. Now what's the best strategy? When I'm looking at this, what I'm seeing is that this line has a definite y-intercept and a definite point over here where it intercepts the x-axis. So if I know the y-axis and I have another point, I can easily get the slope, which means I can get the equation of the line. And then if I have the equation of the line, I can plug in this and get C. So that's going to be our strategy. So first we calculate the slope. That's rise over run. Rise is 4 over the run is obviously 5, and this is negative because it slants that way. So the slope is negative 4 over 5. The y-intercept is going to be 4. So automatically I know the equation of my line is negative 4 fits x plus 4. Now I want to take this point 2 comma C, plug it in. C is over here, negative 4 fifths, 2 plus 4. Work out the math. This becomes negative 8 over 5 plus 4 equals C. I'm going to multiply everything by 5 to make my life easier. 5C equals negative 8 plus 20. That becomes 5C equals positive 12. Divide both sides by 5. We get 12 over 5 is C. And that kind of makes sense because 12 divided by 5 is like 2 and 2/5, and that it's exactly where we fall right over here. So the answer is going to be 12 over 5, and that's that. Question 36 and 37 refer to the following. The table gives the typical adult weight ranges and lifespans for African and Asian elephants in the wild. And it's nicely laid out. African elephants here, Asian elephants here, the minimum weight here, maximum weight here, and the lifespan here. Question 36 says, based on the table, what is the typical minimum weight of an adult African elephant in the wild in pounds? So the minimum weight of an African elephant is 2.5 tons, and they want it in pounds. So 2.5 tons. They're telling us that 1 ton equals 2,000 pounds. So that's an equivalence. We can turn that into a fraction. And I'm going to put pounds on the top, 2,000 pounds over 1 ton. The reason I put tons on the bottom is because when we multiply, we want tons to divide out. So whenever you're converting units, you want to multiply by an identity. So since 2,000 pounds is equal to 1 ton, I'm actually multiplying this by 1 in a sense, and we're not changing the value. So t and t divide out. So 2.5 times 2,000 is obviously 5,000, and that's going to be the answer to this problem. 2.5 tons is the same as 5,000 pounds. This unit remains. Question 37. Based on the table, the typical lifespan of the African elephant in the wild is p% greater than the typical lifespan of the Asian elephant in the wild. So the African elephant is 70 and the Asian elephant is 60. Those are the numbers we're comparing. What is the value of p? So basically what they're asking is what percent greater than 60 is 70. In other words, if you start with 60 and increase to 70, by what percent did you increase? So the way we do that is first we do a simple calculation, 70 minus 60 equals 10, and then we have to figure out what percent of 60 is 10. So I usually like to use proportions. 10 over 60 equals what percent over 100. So that's going to be my x. 10 times 100 is 1,000 divided by 60. When you do this on your calculator, you're going to get 16.666, and it's going to go on and on and on. So you can actually enter that on your test. Just write 16.66, however many they allow you, and that's the answer. And that kind of makes sense because 10 is 1/6 of 6, and so 16 is about 1/6 of 100. So relatively easy question, just make sure not to get mixed up with the numbers. Question 38, we've got a chart and it says the table shows several values of x and the corresponding values of f of x. The function f is defined by f of x equals mx plus b, so you'll notice that that's a line. M and b are constants. What is the value of b? So the first thing you'll notice is that we've got y equals mx plus b. B is the same as the y-intercept. So that's what they want to know. What is the y-intercept of this line? There's a number of ways to do this. You could get the equation of the line by using the given points and then change it to y equals mx plus b form and then figure out b. The shorter way to do this is to recognize that each of these points on the line is connected by slope. So what do I mean? Obviously, you could think of these as ordered pairs, 2, 106, 3, 151, 4, 196, and we want to figure out 0, b. Now, all these points have the same slope. So let's say I calculated the slope between this point and this point. I can take that slope and then calculate using that slope between this point and then solve for b. So that's going to be my strategy. So let's find the slope between the first 2 points. We can look at it over here. That's going to be slope, equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. 151 minus 106 divided by 3 minus 2. What you're going to find is that the slope of the line is 45. Now that we know the slope of the line is 45, we're going to plug in these 2 points, 0, b, and 2, 106. So 45, same thing, y2 minus y1 equals x2 minus x1. That becomes 106 minus b, or y, whatever you want, divided by 2 minus 0. This becomes 106 minus b. This was 45 over here. Multiply both sides by 2, we get 90. And we'll add b to both sides, subtract 90 from both sides, we get b equals 16. And so that's the answer. The y value is 16, and this coordinate actually is 0, 16, because we calculated it from the slope.